Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Americans for Peace Now webinar. With us today is Peace Now Executive Director Lior Amihai. As you know, before we start, we have our usual comments. I will remind you that, like all our webinars, this one is recorded, and you will find the video recording probably tomorrow that will happen on our YouTube channel. The audio will be uploaded sometime later today to our podcast, Peacecast. I will also remind you that you are invited to ask questions, and you can do that anytime during the webinar beginning now using our Q&A tool that is at the bottom of your screen. I ask you that you keep your questions short because we go through them as we go along with the webinar. I'm assuming that by now, most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with Lior Amihai, the executive director of our Israeli sister organization, Shalom Achshav, Peace Now. Lior has been with Peace Now for quite a few years as the co-director of its Settlements Watch project. Then he joined Yesh and was its director, the director of Yesh. And recently he came back to us to head Shalom Achshav. We're very happy about that. And really, very few people know the situation in the West Bank on the ground, particularly as it relates to settlements, better than Lior. So Lior, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ori. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you for being here.
And the reason why we wanted to talk to us, and we're really grateful that you were able to do it at a kind of a short notice, is that Peace Now was involved with a really interesting activity on Friday with the residents of Burqa, which is a West Bank village, northern part of the West Bank, that is really paying the price of the settlers' return to a settlement called Homesh, or a site called Homesh. This was a settlement that was vacated and dismantled in 2005 as a part of the disengagement, and is now being reclaimed, if you will, by the settlers and their allies in the government. And Peace Now had a really interesting, together with other organizations, activity with the residents of Burqa on Friday. So I wanted to ask you, Lior, if you could tell us a little bit about the purpose of this action with Burqa's Palestinian residents. What happened? What was the significance of the action? As you talk, I will show some of the photos, really great photos that were taken at the event. So I'll figure out how to share my screen. So go ahead, Lior.
Well, Ori, thank you, and thank you for allowing me to share. Two questions, I think. One is the purpose, and the other thing, just to describe what really happened, because it was a dramatic event for us. So the purpose, maybe I'll say, was to struggle against Homesh and what Homesh symbolizes and what Homesh means, and there are a lot of elements to Homesh. So as you described rightfully, Homesh is an outpost, so that is an Israeli settlement that is being built by settler initiatives, and now is being supported, or it's been supported for many years, but now directly by the government as well. Now, there are so many things that you can say about Homesh, and I'll mention a few. One of them is settler violence. Homesh, violent settlers arriving from Homesh and attacking Palestinian villages, Burqa first and foremost, but also many others in the area, is something that's been going on for years now, since the establishment of that outpost. And when I say violence, I mean in the worst, as we know it, in the most violent means, in the most frequency, and really just horrible things that we should all be ashamed of. And really, Homesh is a symbol of settler violence. The other thing that Homesh is a symbol for is land theft, because Homesh is built on a hilltop that's 99% of it, if not all of it, sorry, not 99%. All of it is is declared as private property of Palestinian farmers. There are two or three plots that are defined as public lands, so not private lands. But really, it's a hill that's all private lands. And the fact that this small outpost sits there prevents Palestinian villagers to enter any of the plots of lands on that hill. And, when I was the director of Yesh, one of my low points as a director, when I felt that I failed as a director, was when we were pressured by the judges to let the Palestinian farmers enter their lands. Now, the deal was that there were for many points in time, the military prevented, legally speaking, so there was a military order that prevented Palestinians from enter that hilltop. But at some point, they removed the legal order. And then the state said, but look, the Palestinians are not going to their lands. And we argued, they can't, because once they do, they're met with severe violence. And the state didn't really believe us, and the judges didn't really believe us, because if they should complain to the police, and if they don't complain to the police, therefore it didn't happen. And if the military didn't prevent it or didn't document, then it didn't happen. And we were getting the feeling or our lawyers were getting the feeling that if we want to we have to make the case, and we have to show that Palestinians are trying to enter the land and to see what happens. And we sort of told the Palestinians, look, the judges want to see. This would make a good argument. Try to go there, and we sort of, I didn't want to say convince them, but we told them this would help their case. And they went. And they went with one of Yeshin's field researcher. Again, I was the director at the time. And again, the violence that came out against them, I felt at the time, and in today's technology, it's all live, right? So, you sense the fear in the voice of the Yeshin's field researcher who was there, and the Palestinians who were just running from their lives, and they caught one of the Palestinians and they beat them. And following that incident, Yesh and myself as the director, we immediately went to Burqa, to the Palestinian village, and apologized. We went one by one to all these Palestinians that were injured due to that attack. And we said, sorry for putting you under this pressure to go to your lands in order to make the legal case. It wasn't worth it. You guys know best how to handle your politics and how to handle your struggle, and we shouldn't interfere. And that was really a low point for me, and that we sort of enabled and this sort of pressure on them. And that's a demonstration of land theft and settler violence. Now, Homesh is also a symbol of other things, and I'll say them really briefly. One is the attempt to go back to the north part of the West Bank. The north part of the West Bank is the only territory that doesn't have settlements there. There is one area that there are settlements, and of course, it's the Jordan Valley. But there's settlements there. But if you look at the map of the West Bank, there's a chunk of land that's all Palestinian, with military presence, but without settlers. And this is dramatic, because politically speaking, of course, this means that if once there will be a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, you don't have to evacuate settlements. It's not an issue for negotiations whatsoever. And the government of Israel is trying to change that. And they want to establish settlements. Jenin is on the news now. They want to establish settlements all around Jenin and outposts, etc. And by establishing Homesh, that's the first step to establish further settlements in that area and further settlements in outposts. Maybe I'll say a last point, that what I think Homesh symbolizes, and that is the protests in Israel and the judiciary changes that the government is trying to do. Because, as I said, Homesh sits on private Palestinian lands. And there's a legal case against the settlement of Homesh, and one of the arguments is that it sits on private Palestinian land. Now, again, I want to stress that Homesh is an illegal outpost or an unauthorized outpost. That means that all the structures that are there in the presence of settlers there is illegal according to Israeli law, not only according to international law. So the legal argument at court is problematic from the states. There's an outpost there. There is illegal construction. There's illegal presence of settlers. What's happening? Why aren't you preventing them? And the government of Israel knows that. So, and as I said, there's 1, 2, 3 plots of lands that are not privately owned. They're they're public lands. And so what the Israeli government did, they sort of told or maneuvered it in a way, or strategically or tactically, whatever, decided to move the outpost from the private lands to the public lands. Now, concretely, it doesn't mean anything, because Palestinians still don't have access to any of the plots of land that are private. So it doesn't matter if they're on one of the private lands or if they're on the public lands, because the entire hilltop is, there's no access of Palestinians to enter. But legally speaking, if the settlement was on public land, the government of Israel could go to the court and say, oh, look, it's not on private land, it's only on public land. We will establish a settlement there. Now, this is so wrong in so many ways, because of course, public land is Palestinian public land, and it's not for settlements or settlers or whatever. But to the court, this is acceptable. And Israel could then make the case, oh, look, we're establishing a settlement on public land. It's not thievery of private lands. But because this is an unauthorized outpost, you cannot establish an outpost on public land either. It doesn't have a plan. It's not approved, anything. So, and you cannot, for example, you cannot bring equipment to establish a settlement there at all. It's illegal. In order to establish a settlement, you have to have a plan. It has to be approved. There has to be a government decision, etc. A lot of things happen. But in order to make the legal case, the government of Israel ordered the military to enable that there will be equipment and buggers or tractors or whatever it's called, to enter the hilltop and to establish the outpost on the public plot. Now, this is an illegal order by the government. This means that the government told the military, enable construction without a plan, without a government decision, without any steps that are being taken that are legal taken, and build an outpost. An order by the government to build an illegal outpost against Israeli law. So the government is giving the military an order to do something illegal according to Israeli law. And guess what happened? The military accepted and enabled this. Now, when we're talking about judicial changes in the Israeli government, everybody's talking about what will happen if the government will have all this power. And who will the military commanders listen to? Will they listen to the rule of law? Or will they listen to the orders coming from the government? And here we saw a first example of an illegal order that was accepted by the military, that didn't create any or much public discussion about it, and just happened. And this is a shameful moment, I think, for the military and also for Israel, and exemplifies what will happen if and once the judicial changes will proceed and happen.
Fascinating. Before we go to the actual activity that you did there on Friday, just a clarification. Homesh was a full-fledged settlement before 2005, right?
Yes.
So was it built then already on private Palestinian land?
Yes. The answer is yes. And it was a much bigger settlement. And it took the entire hilltop. And yes, the entire hilltop of private Palestinian land. And the justification for that was that it was built in 1978. And until 1979, when Israel established settlements in the West Bank, the status of the lands, whether it's private or public, it was meaningless. And because the justification was security, and they just took military orders. There are still settlements to this day that sit on private Palestinian land that were established in the 70s. And they really continue to renew the military order. The military order to take private Palestinian land in order to establish a settlement. This policy generally ended in 1979 and the 80s. But once Israel evacuated the settlement in 2005, theoretically, the Palestinians, it only makes sense that they'll go back to their lands, and still they haven't. So to this day, almost 20 years since, 18 years since, the evacuation of a settlement that was established on private Palestinian land, Palestinian landowners have not entered or cannot go back to their lands.
So, so you decided, together with the residents of Burqa, to march on Homesh. What happened?
So this was very exciting, and we had several discussions in the Peace Now office, and we said, what can we do? And then one of the colleagues said, maybe let's have a joint march. And frankly, I was very skeptical, because for two reasons. One is that whoever's familiar with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the past 2 decades have been horrible for Israeli-Palestinian cooperation. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't work. It's anti-normalization from the Palestinian end, the weakness of the Israeli left on the other hand, the shaming, the traitorness, if you collaborate with Palestinians. There's so many reasons, and also that it didn't work. So Palestinians are in a place where they said, look, it doesn't work. It just justified. There's not any, I think there aren't any joint Israeli-Palestinian collaborations in the occupied territories to this day. There are some, maybe, but they're more economic based, they're more people to people without a political sort of direct political purpose. They're not a struggle for the occupation. So maybe an economic discussions, or maybe for an environment, or maybe for these sort of things, but they don't discuss or deal with the occupation, and they're not maybe in upfront. So this is something novel in that sense. The other thing that I was skeptical about this was I know, from firsthand experience, that those who will pay the price for this march are the Palestinians. Palestinians will be shot at by the military through grenades, through tear gas, and it will be followed and met with settler violence. During the march, following the march, certainly, just a month ago, we brought diplomats from the EU to Burqa, to the Palestinian village, to view Homesh. That evening, settlers from Homesh arrived and made settler attacks on Palestinians. So what they term price tag immediately follows. And taking these two scenarios in mind, so one, that anti-normalization, this doesn't happen anymore, and two, that the Palestinians will pay the price for this, I was just very skeptical. Nevertheless, Peace Now has contacts with Burqa for quite some time now, through our settlement watch units, through our activity. Last year, we also made some activity jointly with Burqa, and we discussed it. And I must say, that was a moment that I was like, wow, they were so enthusiastic about it. They said, look, this is so important for us. We have our legal battle. This will show the court that we're serious. This will prove the court that, we can't go to our lands. We really want to make a public event around this, that the legal case will be, amplified in the public arena. And they were like, come every Friday. Let's do this several times. They were like pushing us to do this. And they said, look, let's do this and let's do it together. And we started and we met 4 or 5 times during the past 2 months, perhaps. And we planned this out very strategically. We thought, okay, we'll meet on this date and we'll go from here. And there's a road that goes over here. Oh, and this goes through Area C. I can't, as the peace now, I can't move Israelis there without the permission, and the military will never move. So we found a route that's all in Area C. And we discussed it in a way, really, we just planned it out and we thought of how to make it through. And again, this was, and we maintained the identities of both publics. Like we went on, I'll say it differently. There in the past, there was some collaboration with Israelis and Palestinians, but it was always like in Bil'in, if you remember at that time. But that was full on a Palestinian struggle, and you had Israelis that were in support of that. But an Israeli-Palestinian struggle against something, taking in mind that this is first and foremost a Palestinian struggle, but you also have Israelis coming with their identity to this, was something novel. So we planned it out, and again, they loved it. They wanted this. This was something that they even encouraged us to do. They pushed us to join.
You actually received a formal invitation from the mayor of Burqa, right? From the head of the local council.
And again, and this is to my request, because knowingly that these are all private Palestinian lands, I didn't want that we'll bring Israelis to trespass private lands. So I said we have to have an official invitation that we're against settlers going to trespassing in Palestinian land, so we can't do it ourselves. So I asked them, can we have an invitation to this, that we can even show the military if they'll ask, or even to justify to ourselves and to the public that we're not. And they immediately wrote this, and they said this beautiful letter saying the people of Burqa are inviting us to a non-violent march to their lands, and yeah, they were completely in support of this.
What happened on Friday?
So what happened on Friday? So first of all, the Israelis, once we came out with a call that we're going to march, we got immediate support by Israeli organizations. So before we came out with a call, we approached other Israeli colleague organizations from Zazim and Breaking the Silence and all these other combatants for peace and then about 10 Israeli organizations, Mahsom Watch and others. I feel that I need to mention all of them by name, but really all their logos are, and we sort of shared with this. And of course, we also talked with Yesh, who represents them in front of the court. And all of the Israeli organizations were in support of this. Yesh, the lawyers, they loved the idea. They said it makes their case, their legal case stronger. So we really got encouraged by the support, and everybody wanted to join this sort of march. And once we came out publicly, the amount of Israelis that joined, we had 450 participants who paid for a bus ride. That's, usually when I was at Peace Now 5, 6, 10 years ago, we never had people pay for the buses. We'd order a couple of buses, people would sign up, and just to make it as many people as possible. Now, because of the mess and we wanted to better organize, we said, okay, let's collect a small fee for the bus ride. We gave some tickets, and we got the people were buying. We had, again, 450 people participate. And this is a time that we had, on the last week that this happened, there were, I think, several, at least 2 attacks, one terror attack against an Israeli settler, I believe, and another against an Israeli soldier. So Israelis in not too far from that area were being shot at by Palestinian fighters. And also there was a military operation, a very severe one at Jenin, just a couple of days. It ended on Wednesday, I think, ish. So, and still, and this, of course, I think if we didn't have these sort of events, we'd double the numbers, because we reached 400, the figure, or almost 350 or something earlier in the week. So Jenin and all that, I think, and the event made it, stopped the participants. We would have many more if these events didn't happen. But nevertheless, we had 9 buses, full buses of Israelis from the entire areas of Israel, from the north, from the south, from Jerusalem, Haifa, Tel Aviv, the Galil, from Beersheba, coming in to this march. And what happened was that we started driving to, right before we entered the West Bank, all the buses met, and we started driving, as all the 9 buses together, one after the other. And knowingly that the military would prevent this, not because they said anything, we even notified them. We sent a letter to the military earlier the week saying, look, we're going into this march. Please prepare yourself in advance because of settler violence. Make sure that the settlers won't attack us. So the military was well aware of this on Monday morning. The event was Friday, and they didn't respond to this. We started, so we were 9 buses, we're in the West Bank, we're driving to Burqa, and we had expected from our experience and our knowledge about struggles in the occupied territory, Israeli struggles against the occupation, we knew that the military would prevent us, despite the fact that they didn't mention anything. And we went on an off route, and we started driving. On an off route, just parallel to the main road. But once we took the turn, the military came and stopped us, and they didn't say it was an illegal. They didn't say anything that they're preventing us. They just said, "Hey, wait, let us check. What are you doing here? We're not familiar with this." All of a sudden, 9 buses. Let's see, and we immediately understood what's happening. They were sort of reinforcing themselves and organizing themselves in order to prevent our march. Once we sort of understood that, we told all the participants that this is happening. The military is about to prevent us from walking. They've already stopped our buses from continuing. We have to start marching to the march. We have to start marching to Burqa, to the village, in order to start our march, to meet the Palestinian partners. And this was a tough decision because we had young people, certainly, but we also had elderly people. And this was, this is Israel, or the occupied territories. This is the sun. This is the summer. This is, there's no shadows. So it's all under the sun. And we had a 3.5 kilometer walk. That's, I think, about 2 miles, I believe. And correct me, Ori, I think about a 2 mile walk. And some of the people were above the age of 80. But nevertheless, we started marching. And more or less, the military enabled us to do so. We outnumbered them dramatically. They were just 4 or 5 soldiers. We were again about 400 Israelis, and we started marching. And that was a very optimistic point because we had the drums and we were singing songs and slogans and just walking freely and understanding and hopeful that we're coming. Once we finished the 3.5 kilometer, the 2 mile walk, the military sort of was prepared for us at the end of the road and met us there and said, you're not continuing anywhere. And at that point, they started throwing grenades. How do you call it? When they hit him. So it's not like
stun grenades.
Stun grenades. Yeah. Stun grenades and tear gas at us. But again, we were at a field, a very dry field of olive trees. And they started, every time they threw these stun grenades, it started making fires. And the fire started spreading. And the people started going to various directions to sort of avoid the fire and to try to escape the military. And this is a place where I was very afraid because we sort of lost control of the events. I lost, as the director who led the march, we lost control of what's happening. People were starting to disperse themselves. One, they wanted to reach Burqa, the protesters. We wanted to get there. On the other hand, we wanted to escape the fire. And again, we were a mix of young and elderly, and people were, were smoking, were smelling or breathing the smoke and feeling the tear gas in our eyes. And people were going to various directions. It was a very fearful moment. And also know that I think even people that were experienced in our experience in the struggle were surprised by the military retaliation, because it's shameful, but it's true that, Palestinians cannot protest non-violently in the occupied territories. They're always met with violence, and Palestinians cannot march. If the Palestinians want to make the march that we did as Israelis, they can't. And they will be met with live fire if they do so. And arrests and whatever. But us Israelis, we're privileged. We are not used to, the military. We had officers in the march. We had former members of Knesset in the march. And they were thrown stun grenades and and tear gas, etc. So we were surprised by the extent or how the military responded to us. Now this created something good though, because through the mass, we had one group of about 200 people that started walking to Burqa on the main highway, and another about 70 people on a different way to Burqa. And those 70 people made it to Burqa, maybe 100 people, they made it to Burqa. And the rest was just all over. And I was just fetching these people. I was just going around to make sure that everybody's safe and that we know everybody and we know where everybody's at, and etc. And what was also amazing is that Palestinians who were there, either because they knew of the protests and they wanted to meet us, or they came, or just others that were just there, started bringing us water and started taking the elderly in their cars and bringing them to Burqa. We had Israelis who came to Burqa without the military knowing it, in Palestinian cars, because they just saw these people walking there. They were all dried up under the sun, in between fire and tear gas and whatever. And they took them in their cars and brought them to the village in order to take care of them. So it's just absurd and in a way also sad that Israel is in this point, that a peaceful march against illegality, against thievery, against violence, of hope of Israeli Palestinians together, being brave and courageous. We are going against our government, Palestinian village going against anti-normalization. And the military and the government is responding as it did. Now, we ended up very proud and very optimistic because one, we did have these 70, maybe 100 Israelis that did go to Burqa and they marched at Burqa. And and we had the slogan in Hebrew and Arabic, and of course it was the same slogan again in the coordination. We decided on it together, and so it was all, and we had the sticks with the slogans on it again, and so it was all jointly together. And so I was happy we made the march at Burqa. So to a degree, it was successful, and we met with the Palestinians, and we succeeded. On the other hand, it was very severe, very violent, and I think it just shows that, again, that this sort of action is what the Israeli government fears for the most. Joint Israeli-Palestinian cooperation against the occupation is something that people just don't know how to handle it. And maybe I'll just say another sentence in context. We are about, 2 weeks following severe pogroms by Israeli settlers against Palestinians. Hundreds of settlers going into Palestinian villages, throwing Molotov cocktail bottles at them, throwing stones at Palestinian villages, burning cars without arrests. Enable the military is always restraint, is enabling them to do so. While they do it, they establish 6-7 outposts, in additional outposts. That's accepted. The military is not preventing that. So you can see the different responses to this.
So, are you at peace now, planning to continue with this type of activity? I know that in the past there was a little bit of a reluctance on the Israeli side, the Peace Now side, to engage in such activities, and I also know, obviously, that there's a great deal of reluctance on the Palestinian side to engage in activities that have to do with what is known as normalization. Do you feel like there is potential for more such activity in the future?
I think so, but in the same sort of manner that we conducted this one, I think that this week or next week we will drive up to Burqa once again and organize the next talking stage. I think that there is a feeling that we do want to do this again, and we want to be smart, we want to do it again. It showed power and strength. However, we do want to speak with the Palestinians to see what they feel. I must tell you that the immediate responses by our Palestinian colleagues were very positive. When we were sitting on the ground for hours waiting for the people, for the people of 70 that made it to Burqa, the other 300 was waiting about 2 kilometers below in the shade and whatever. And during that time, Palestinians from Burqa took different various, offset routes, because they know better than anyone, they live there. And they came speaking with us, people from the municipality, people from the village. And they spoke to us and they were so enthused and so happy. And, I don't really know the reason for this, but one of the explanations that we thought of, or that somebody said, and I think it has some essence to it, it's true, is that because of anti-normalization and because that there is no Israeli-Palestinian joint activities on this for so long, this was a moment of hope. We showed them, I think, Israelis that support their cause, and we were different kind of. We weren't the military, and we weren't settlers, and we weren't theft. That were taking their land or violent settlers. So this, I think, they were very encouraged, and we already received sort of calls from a few of them that we should plan again and we should conduct it, and a lot of ideas. But we haven't done this officially yet, so we'll go in the coming days there and we'll plan it together.
Mm-hmm. Lior, let's zoom out a little bit and go back to our well-known territory of settlements and talk a little bit about you just issued a new report that has a lot of data on settlement construction, settlement activity in the territories. Obviously, there's a rise in numbers. This we all knew with this new government. But what is interesting to me, and I wanted to ask you to talk about a little bit, is to go a little bit beyond the numbers and talk about patterns. Whether there are new patterns that characterize this government's attitude toward settlement construction.
Oh, thank you for this question, and I think this question is when I brief people around. This is what I try to say, that basically the message is that this past half year of the government, I think there are 4 or 5 trends that are happening that are going under the radar and that people are not noticing because the focus is on the judicial changes, because the focus is on so many other things that this government is doing, and that government's policies on the occupation it's not that it's not heard. It does make the news. There is discussion. Sometimes there's even international criticism toward them. But the sort of the bird's eye view, a broader picture, summing it all together, I think is missing in the analysis. And I think the first one is what you said, and that's the extent of the amount of settlements and housing units that they're establishing. In half a year, they've surpassed any other year in recent history, maybe since 1967. Peace Now Settlement Watch Team is systematically collecting this data of the amount of housing units by plans since 2012. Of course, it has a lot of other information that's systematically from before, and it's the most in any other year. And we sort of started comparing it to other various data, and we believe that it's the most in any other year since 1967 that they have advanced in half a year, in less than half, or in about half a year. Now, and this is spread out in the entire, all over the West Bank. The second thing in regards to this is, of course, the policy towards outposts. And I think there are, two things to say about that, or three. One is that the policy is to retroactively legalize all of the outposts. There are roughly 150 outposts in the occupied territories. Now, to retroactively legalize an outpost, it has two main implications. One, it's a recognition of a new settlement, something that Israel in the past didn't want to do. Therefore, the outpost. The outpost is a way to establish a settlement without recognizing it. So in order not to receive international criticism, this doesn't matter anymore for the state of Israel. And the second is, of course, more in actuality. An outpost is relatively small. It's maybe 20 mobile homes, etc. Once you make it in a settlement, it becomes much larger. It's much more infrastructure, roads. Just one example: you have a couple of outposts that are maybe 20 mobile homes or just a few, and they have plans for about roughly 200 housing units for them. So 200 housing units, that's 1,000, 1,200 settlers. It's a small town. 20 mobile homes is much smaller, and so it is very significant. Now, so the Israeli government intends to retroactively legalize all of them. So far, it's retroactive, and again, in half a year, it retroactively legalized 18. Again, I don't think that in any other, it never done so in such extent. I mean, this is something very significant. It never done so before. Now, the other thing that they're doing is that all of these outposts that they haven't retroactively legalized, there are many of them, they've started to connect them to roads or in infrastructure, etc. In fact, they made a government decision, a cabinet decision to be exact, that says that they're comprising a list of all of these outposts that they intend to legalize. We believe the figure is about 70 or 80. And they are saying, look, we're well aware we can't just retroactively legalize all of them. That would be too much, criticism. However, whichever outpost will be in the list will already start receiving infrastructure, electricity, water, etc. So, they're starting the legalization, the de facto legalization of it, if you want. And that's, of course, significant because an outpost, that's not connected to normal electricity, and once it is connected to normal electricity, or once it's connected to a much improved road, will make access to it and much more attractive to people to move there. And that's also the idea for an outpost. Now it's, we have settlers who are living in outposts for many years, and they're starting to complain. And once you make it a settlement, then of course life improves dramatically. Now I'll say two other trends, and maybe I won't focus too much of them. One of them is, of course, roads generally in the occupied territories. This is something that's been there for quite some time, so the government is not new on this. However, we did look at the budget for 2020 this year, and 25% of the budget of transportation ministry is on roads in the occupied territories for settlers. Now, this is absurd because some of the settlements are close to the Green Line. This is not roads for them. This is roads for settlements that are deep in the occupied territories. So for a very small population, so about 5% of the Israeli settlers, of the Israeli public, lives in settlements in the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem. Most of them live close to the Green Line in many ways. Those who are living deep in the West Bank are most often the more radical one, the most difficult one for a two-state solution, etc. These are the ones that are going to get these new improved roads, again, from political purposes, because once you make you shorten the gap between the deep of the West Bank and the state of Israel, it becomes a much more attractive settlement, and you can start driving there and becomes a suburb of the state of Israel, and what's the problem, etc. And the other thing I'll say is about industrial areas. Just there's one industrial area that they're advancing. This is going to be the largest industrial area in the occupied territories for settlements, of course. And again, it has no sense whatsoever. People are opposing it from non-political sort of points of view. So other industrial areas in the area within Israel are saying we don't want this, and because it's competition and you don't need it. It has no economic logic to it whatsoever. There's only one logic to it, and that's to normalize the settlements. Because okay, we'll bring Israelis to shop there. We'll make businesses open there, and we'll sort of blur the green line completely. And in order to bring the Israeli economy to the occupied territories, and that's the idea behind it. And that's also happening. Oh, and maybe I'll say just
go ahead.
Two more points that I should say. And I mentioned one is the north part of the West Bank, which is, I should have said that's like one of the most significant ones. Again, I mentioned it before, so I won't repeat, but again, the north part of the West Bank is a place there's Palestinian continuity. There aren't any settlements there, and this is going to change. This is already changing. So if you close your eyes and imagine the only region in the occupied territories that doesn't have any settlements, in half a year time, in 2 year time, in 4 years time, I don't know, but soon enough, it will be an area with settlements and outposts, and just like any other area in the occupied territories, this will affect, first and foremost, of course, Palestinians, because their livelihood will change dramatically. But it will also change, the life of soldiers that will have to defend small outposts around Jenin. And of course, anyone who believes in the two-state solution, this will make it much more problematic. And Israel made 3 strategic decisions about this. One of them is Homesh, as we mentioned. The other is it canceled the disengagement law from 2005, which prevented Israelis to enter that area. Now Israelis are enabled to enter that area. And the other thing is that they're making it a touristic site, an archaeological site. They're investing about slightly less than $10 million in a touristic archaeological site in a Palestinian village in order to make it a Jewish heritage site that Israelis will come there and visit there and attract the Israeli public to come there. So these sort of things is in order to change the north part of the West Bank and to make it a very intense, with a lot of settlements and outposts and Israeli presence there. And maybe and the last one I'll say, and I'll stop there, is of course E1 and Ma'ale Adumim, which is who's ever in the business following knows that this area is very sensitive from a political point of view. And I'll say 2 things about that. One is that it cuts the West Bank. It's problematic from the heart of the West Bank. It's the center. It distracts Ramallah, East Jerusalem, and Bethlehem. And the other thing is that there's Palestinian communities living there. And what Israel is doing now, the government of Israel, what it's doing now is it's creating a Palestinian road that will mobilize all Palestinian traffic out of E1 and Ma'ale Adumim area in order that it will be to de facto annexing. So it's not saying, oh, we're annexing this area. It's creating the reality that there won't be any Palestinians there. And then it's de facto annexed. And then they will be able to say, oh, look, what's the problem? We can annex this area. It's not preventing anything. There are no Palestinians there. And there's a road that can connect Ramallah and Bethlehem. We've established it for them. But in essence, it means that this area will be without Palestinians and will enable the annexation of Ma'ale Adumim and E1. And I know this is very detailed, and if this was not clear, I'll be able to explain more or just move it aside. The take from it is that without fully annexing Ma'ale Adumim and E1, the government of Israel is making the physical changes on the ground to make it de facto annexed. A very large territory without Palestinians that would be almost in essence part of the state of Israel.
And if people who are watching this are interested in more details about E1 or about any other of the issues that Lior just spoke about, there you can find them on Peace Now's website. Lior, before we continue, there are 2 clarification questions regarding the protest of Friday. One of them is, did the march ever reach Homesh? I understand that no, it did not, right?
It did not, but I must say, and this is an insider, that our main purpose, we wanted to march to Homesh. We knew that the military would not prevent it. Our goal was that we'll have a joint Israeli-Palestinian march. That was our goal. We wanted the Israeli people to meet the Palestinian people and join together. and we succeeded to a certain degree to do that. So
Yeah.
no, we didn't go to Homesh. We knew that we would be prevented, but in our sort of discussions beforehand, we knew that that's unrealistic to do under the current circumstances. Let's try to outmaneuver and just get the march together.
Yeah, and you know, I follow closely the coverage in both the Israeli media and the international media. The coverage was very, very extensive. There's a lot of coverage. So that image of Israelis and Palestinians marching together was definitely out there. The other clarification question is who set fires and why? So I think we discussed it. The fires were not intentionally set. They, if I understand correctly, they were a result of the, you know, the very dry weather and the stun grenades that were thrown by the IDF. Correct?
Not look, I don't know if they were intentionally set, but they were, because the first fire that started, the military started. They tried to stop it. They started to prevent the fire from happening. That was the first fire. There were dozens of fires that started opening up. So even if they didn't intentionally think of it in advance, they realized immediately that this is happening, and they continued to do so. And they stopped preventing the fires from happening. We had Palestinian firefighters coming and starting to get the fire off. So the military knew what they were doing, and it really created this mess. So yes, it was the soldiers who were throwing the stun grenades. They created the fire, and they knew that it would happen. And it happened in many, many locations in the field that we were standing.
So we discussed several ways in which new government policies are advancing de facto annexation. Another one, and you just issued a report on that, is a bureaucratic one, and that is the settlement administration under Minister Bezalel Smotrich within the Ministry of Defense. Let's talk a little bit about that. We don't have much time left, but what is it, the settlement administration, and how does it advance the process of West Bank annexation?
Okay, so this is a very important question, and I'll try to be very simple about it as much as possible because it is very complicated. And again, when we say trends, this is probably, I didn't mention, but this is probably the most important trend that's happening. And the trend is that Israel is not officially annexing the occupied territories. It realized that it can't, probably because of international pressure. It wants to, but it knows that if it'll do that, it will be a step too much. The government of Israel is very clever of doing exactly an inch below chaos of international. So it's doing whatever it can, just an inch below to prevent. But it is de facto and de jure. It's taking policies and actions that are de facto and de jure annexing territories. And the biggest step is what's happening with Bezalel Smotrich and the authorities that he's been given. Now, I'll just say Bezalel Smotrich is one of the most radical ministers, somebody who's been the director of one of the most awful organizations that is, Rekavim, that its purpose is to demolish Palestinian houses, pretty much, in the occupied territories, and somebody that's very knowledgeable, that his entire ideology is to build settlements, build outposts, and to transfer Palestinians away from their lands. That's the only purpose for him. And because of this government, he's becoming the finance minister and also a minister within the Ministry of Defense. But he's very clever, and knowing that Netanyahu is very weak, and that this government, we won't get into that. But anyway, he took the political opportunity given to him, and being the finance minister, that is enabled to allocate the funding and also has maneuver over the Ministry of Defense because that also needs money. So a very pivotal and strong person within the government, and also a minister in the Ministry of Defense that he took upon himself various authorities that were never given to anyone else. And he signed an agreement with a Minister of Defense that sort of gave him authorities that were never given to anyone else that were at the Minister of Defense. And as part of that, he has also established what they call the settlement administration. And the idea is to manage all aspects of life of the settlers and the settlements. Now, this is very complicated, and I'll say really what's the point to get here is that the West Bank is not annexed to Israel. This means that it's ruled, governed by the military. This means that the mandate is from international law, and that in theory, Israel is supposed to, the manager, the military, is supposed to take the considerations of Palestinians first and foremost. Obviously, this doesn't happen, but nevertheless, it's still run by military, and that's the obligation, and that's what it's been held account to. Now, what settlers are frustrated with is that they don't want this. They want to be just like another region within the state of Israel. And what he's basically practically doing is creating a ministry that will be responsible for the settlers. And he's putting civilians there that are reporting to him, and that their obligation is to the Israeli citizens. Now, again, this is very complicated, but because it's complicated because we know how the Israeli policy is, and we know that it's already pro-settlers and pro-settlement and against Palestinians. But this is taking it a structural level much further, and enabling civilians who will report to Smotrich that they will have no, whatsoever guise or disguise or any obligation to international law or to the Palestinians. They won't be under their consideration at all. And they will only have to take care of their obligation to the settlers, and they're going to run they're going to run the life of the settlers pretty much. So this is in essence what it is, and structurally this is dramatic because first of all, it really makes no sense. There is no difference anymore. So settlements are going to become just like there's going to be like a Ministry of Settlements, and they're reported to the Israeli government. So the Israeli government is in essence directly running the show in Yaakov, not the military anymore. And of course the authority that this administration took on itself, and the fact that Palestinians are being not considered at all, makes it a de jure annexation. That's how we see it, at least.
Leo, we have to start wrapping up, and we'll do that soon with the help of our chair of the board, Jim Klesnick, who will join us soon. Before we do that, just a quick question, because I know that people are always interested in the American angle. President Biden yesterday said a few critical things about this government and about its settlement policy. Today, Minister Smotrich already had a comeback where he said Israelis are allowed to build wherever they want in the land of Israel. Is this government attuned at all? Does it care at all about what the American administration is saying about U.S. Policy regarding settlements and things of that sort?
I think that the Israeli government considers three things when it makes decisions. If they could do whatever they want, there are only three sort of elements that could stop them. One of them is the military, and therefore the fact that we have now, under the protest, we have people from the reserves that are saying we will not serve anymore. That threatens the Israeli government. And the second is the economy. That if you had businessmen and you have the high-tech industry saying we will not invest, we will take our funding out, that's a threat to the Israeli policy. And the third is the international community. And I must say, this is the weakest link here, because it's not serving to its end. And if, we feel here that if the international community, and first and foremost the Americans, would be more strict with the government of Israel in regarding to its policies, first and foremost to the occupied territories, also of course the attempt to judicial changes, but of course also to the occupied territories, which is international. It's not internal Israeli thing. It's a matter of between Palestinian and Israelis, and if the Americans would be more strict there, I think it will make a much bigger impact. But yes, they're definitely attuned. The fact that Smotrich is not being met by anyone in the States, is not being met by anyone in France or anywhere else around the world, likewise Ben-Gvir, that means a lot. It characterizes them to the Israeli public. It strengthens the point that they see them as radical lunatics that that have no sense in mind. It's very important, and I must say that our hope is that what more do we need, right? Because for many years we had this practice on the ground that was against a two-state solution, but the Israeli government had the lip service of saying, "Oh no, we can evacuate them. We left Sinai Peninsula, we left South Lebanon, we left the Gaza Strip. We can do it under a political agreement. That the Palestinians are not partners." Now the Israeli government is saying, we will never have a Palestinian state. The Palestinian future will always be under occupation. There's no other alternative for them, and that's the official policy and the official practice. So what more do we need to have the Americans take a stronger role? And yes, and it has a very big impact on the Israeli government and also on the Israeli public that's watching, and not doing is also meaning, because that shows that it's fine. It's maybe it's not such a big problem anyways. If the Americans don't care about it.
So that was, of course, a leading question in order to lead me after your comments, obviously, to tell anyone who's listening to this that it really is our role to be to put pressure on our administration, to in turn put pressure on the Israeli government to reverse its course, or at least to stop. In that vein, I'd like to invite Jim Klutznick, the chair of our board, to say a few words in closing.
Thank you, Ori, and thank you, Lior, and to your colleagues and the fellow Israeli organizations and all the participants of this march, in spite of all the odds against it. I think it's encouraging, not only in and of itself, and for the reasons that you stated, for the work you as our colleagues do on the ground there, and Ori noted what we try to do over here, and are encouraged to do even more so in light of what you're doing. I think what you guys did hopefully shows the major demonstrators who've been now at it for over, it's about 7 months now they've been at this. I think, or 7, no, I'm sorry, it's 27, for about a half, yeah, it is over a half a year they've been doing this. And I hope they're listening and seeing what you've done, because they need to incorporate the Palestinians into what they're doing. And you noted that in your talk. And you guys are on the front line there. And I encourage everybody who's listening to this and who heard you today to join us and you in helping enable our government to understand. And I think our president the other day made, a matter of fact, it was yesterday with Fareed Zakaria, made the point about the Israeli government at this point. And so I applaud you. We salute you. And we join with you, and we will back you up here in the United States. And we need to help our own fellow Jews in America understand that after all these years of propaganda, they better start joining the right side here and allow for a two-state solution, and most importantly, sovereignty for the Palestinian people. You won't have peace there until there is. So thank you. Give my regards to everybody in Israel at Sholem and Shab. And it's good to see you.
Thank you, Jim. Just a reminder before we say goodbye that the audio recording of this webinar will be available on our podcast, Peacecast, sometime later today, and on our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow. Lior, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ori, and thank you, Jim, for this kind of work and words. And of course, none of this could have happened without your support, your year-long support for us. So it means the world to us. And so thank you, Jim, and thank you, Ori, for everything and for enabling me to be here.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Goodbye, everyone, and thanks
Thank you. Bye-bye.